Brian Burrows, Executive Director of the American Kratom Association. We're also joined this evening by Mac Haddo, our Senior Fellow on Public Policy, and our Chairman, former United States Representative Matt Salmon. Tonight, we have very important updates to discuss with you out of Atlanta, Florida, West Virginia, and other key states. Additionally, we have a very exciting update out of Vermont. The Q&A is open for your questions, and without further delay, I will now turn it over to Matt Salmon for our welcome message.
Thanks a lot, Brian. I appreciate the opportunity to join with some of the stalwarts out there that have been fighting the fight and continue to fight the fight for the safe and free use of kratom. We all believe very, very strongly that people ought to be able to have kratom as a choice, and it's a much better alternative than many of the other things that people use for pain relief or for for a whole host of different things, and we're proud to be part of this association. We've had some great successes over the last few years, since 2016, when we were able to put the DEA on their heels when it came to scheduling kratom and move ahead in the public policy arena through many, many states, passing the Kratom Consumer Protection Act through state by state. Overcoming the concerns of many who have been driven by the FDA predominantly to try to ban kratom in some of the various states and cities, counties. And I'm proud of the effort that we've had. We've had a good run for the last several years, but I'm very, very concerned that, with the successes that we've had, that maybe we're not as vigilant as we need to be. Maybe we're a little bit complacent. And tonight is a little bit of celebration of some of the great accomplishments of the association, but also a little bit of a red flag to put out there. We're not done yet. And we know that with a stroke of a pen, everything could change. Every time we are able to tell our story to people and produce the actual science behind the industry, we're very, very successful. If people will actually, listen and open their minds and their ears to look at what's actually going on. We've showed time and time again that these scare tactics used by the FDA are just flat out garbage. They don't mean anything. The FDA is operating on innuendo and hearsay and not on real evidence. And we've been able to counter them time and time again with much success. And Mac Haddo is a large reason for a lot of that success. He's coordinated the lobbying efforts both at the federal level. And by the way, while we speak, the Consumer Protection Act at the federal level is being introduced with Senator Mike Lee. And we're proud that that effort is moving in the right direction. We're having some good success in some states, but some challenges also. And we're not out of the woods, folks. And so I just want to thank you for sticking with us, for fighting the fight. Your efforts truly have made a difference, but we're going to need a lot more of that. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce my great friend and colleague, Mac Haddo.
Thank you, Matt, and welcome to all of you that have joined us here on this webinar tonight. As Matt and Ryan have said, we've got some exciting news and to share with some of the efforts that we've undertaken that are the product of the support that you have provided to the AK to really promote the Consumer Protection Act and the whole philosophy that we have about making sure that kratom products that are introduced for sale are quality products that meet compliance standards and that are not adulterated nor contaminated because we're using good practices to make sure they're not. What I thought I would do is go through some of the states that we're working in, or all the states, and describe where we are, and then allow time for questions and answers. And you can put your questions up on the chat board, and we'll try to get through as many as we can and going forward. This has been a busy week, and I know there are a lot of people that reach out and want an immediate answer. And I apologize, I'm on a lot and just getting in between and negotiating with some of the parties in the legislature and with the regulatory agencies in the states has been a challenge because we took on a very aggressive workload in this 2023 legislative sessions. So I'm going to start just, and I think this is instructive when we look at where we are with some of these states. In the state of Oregon, we had passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, and the state regulatory agency just held a webinar where they got input from the vendors. So despite the fact that the law had passed last year, they are now in the rulemaking process, and that's natural. There's nothing wrong with that. We just want to make sure that they don't overregulate it or impose rulings that undermine the fundamental principles that the Kratom Consumer Protection Act is based on. So we're watching that, encouraging the vendors to get involved in it so that they have good input. In the state of Georgia, we just completed what I think so far is a very successful transition from what was started out as a ban bill, and that was introduced by Representative Townsend. He did so because of a report of a constituent where the family believed that Kratom had harmed their son and that he was in a psych ward because of it. And that, of course, is a situation that is very typical of the kinds of arguments against Kratom that are made by family members and empowered by the loosely organized group, the Kratom Danger Awareness thing, and they try to repeat information. And the information is not always correct. It may be passionately accepted and believed in by the families, but I think that they're entitled to know the truth based on science, and that's what we promote. And so these are sensitive times when we have these discussions, but we have to confront them. Representative Townsend, in good faith, put in a bill that he thought was essential in order to ban Kratom in the state of Georgia, despite the fact that there is a KCPA that was enacted in 2019. And in that process, the lack of understanding and the lack of information by many of those legislators, some of whom did not even know the KCPA was passed. For those of you that watched the hearing, there was a comment made that in 2018, the state of Georgia commissioned a study and nothing was done. Well, that's absurd, because in 2019, they passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, but there were legislators that honestly did not know that. They get up and say, oh, well, what we're really against are these tinctures, these bottles of Kratom, and they're the bad actors in this thing. I'll just try to reach for one if I thought I had one here on my desk. And they say these extracts, and they say that if it's a bottled Kratom product, it's an extract, when we know that an extract is really either a tincture bottle or it's a powder, because the extraction method is the critical component of determining whether or not a product is dangerous. If the extraction method does not comply with the FDA standards for using food grade solvents. If you use an industrial solvent that excessively extract and concentrate the alkaloids, then it can be a potentially dangerous product. And we have always advocated that if you're going to do extractions, that they have to meet food grade solvent so that the residual solvent content of the actual finished product doesn't contain dangerous solvents, and that the power and the potency of the Kratom product is not enhanced by those inappropriately used chemicals in order to extract the alkaloids. So, and of course, extracts actually are very safe in the sense, as long as they're extracted properly, in terms of cleaning out all the microbial load and standardizing. You know exactly how much metrogeny you're going to get in that. But that was part of the discussion. And these legislators honestly believed the misinformation, all driven by trial attorneys who are prosecuting cases that they're trying to win in court. And they decided to use the Georgia legislature as a way of getting a ban in place so that, I mean, clearly they wanted to go to the judge in those cases and say, this product is dangerous. And even the Georgia legislature recognizes it's dangerous. So the long and short of all this is that we went through extensive negotiations. I participated in 3 hearings in Georgia this week. And the outcome is that we have now converted that ban bill. The ban is no longer being promoted in Georgia. And in fact, the bill that was passed out of the committee this morning unanimously is an appropriate framework for regulation and strengthening the existing Kratom Consumer Protection Act. There are some pieces of that bill that I don't like, particularly with the criminalization and the if you manufacture a product, then you're going to that it doesn't meet the standards, then you are potentially subject to a felony charge. We did weaken that considerably by putting in qualifying language that you have to recklessly and knowingly do so. We think that protects most people except the bad actors. But that penalty phase is one that just concerns me generally. They actually had a provision in the bill that if you possessed kratom that was in excess of the amounts that they were allowing in the original bill, then you were guilty of a felony. That's not good public policy, and I made that clear. So we're pleased that the bill that was passed out of committee is a good bill, and that it will strengthen the KCPA in Georgia. Now, the trial attorneys are infuriated by this, and they're going to go and try to scuttle this bill in the Rules Committee and in the House floor. They don't want it to go over to the Senate because it has a very good chance of passing there. So that's our challenge. We are really at the mercy of these rules because they only have a couple of days to make this decision. Because of the controversy being generated by the trial attorneys, they may decide not to let the bill go forward. But the good news is that this bill that was passed unanimously out of the committee, if it doesn't get to the House floor in the next couple of days, will in the next legislative session go back to that committee in the form that it was passed, and we can start that process again because it is a biennial legislature where they continue in session for 2 years in the state of Georgia. Glad to answer any questions anybody has on that when we get through this. But let's go through some of the other states. Colorado, there was an attempt by the Department of Regulations to overregulate kratom to the point that it was going to cost enormous amounts, millions of dollars, to create a new bureaucracy to regulate kratom as they do medical marijuana. And we have fought hard. We've resisted. We finally said no to the Department of Regulations when they proposed a set of regulations that were onerous. And so we had the bill filed by our sponsors in the state of Colorado, and the Department of Revenue came in screaming that they wanted to add stuff, although they didn't meet the deadlines that they were required to do it. So we have told the Department of Revenue that we're not going to accept their regulations. And so we're now in a standoff, which is to our advantage, because if we don't pass anything that will clarify this, the Department of Revenue has until, I think, September 1st to publish regulations under the original bill that was filed, which limits them to labeling regulations. So I think that we're in an excellent position in Colorado, and we're going to continue to work on that. In the state of Mississippi, we have defeated the ban. There were 2 ban bills. We've defeated those. We did not, unfortunately, get the KCPA out because that was a casualty of the concession made by the sponsors of the ban bills that we also wouldn't get a KCPA. That's bad public policy too. The idea that we wouldn't regulate it, they're asking for a ban, and all we're saying is if you can't get a ban, which they could not, then why wouldn't you want to regulate it? But we live to fight another day in Mississippi, and we can chalk that up to being a victory because they were hell-bent in order to ban kratom in the state of Mississippi, and that's not going to happen this year. In Louisiana, the legislative session has not started. They start way late in April, but there's already a ban bill filed. We're working aggressively in Louisiana. We think that we're going to be in a good position when the legislative session starts with a good KCPA bill that will be filed by that point. And hopefully we're going to have some pretty powerful sponsors of the KCPA in Louisiana. So we can rest right now easy as we prepare for it, but we'll work hard once we get this done. So we're going to keep working on that. In the state of Texas, our bills are filed. They're looking to schedule hearings. As everybody knows, we got through the House with an overwhelming vote 2 years ago when they were in session, and we got to the Senate consent calendar, and then the session blew up, and 120 bills were left on the floor, including the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. So we're relatively confident that we'll be able to pass the KCPA in Texas. In the Missouri, the same situation. We're moving forward with filings and getting committee scheduled. In Kansas, we got through the House committee. I testified there. We had a great discussion. And I thought one interesting thing from that was that one of the committee members is an emergency room doctor. And in response to the claims being made by some that Kratom had all these adverse events associated with it, and they're raising concerns about the demands on the healthcare system, one of our sponsor of the KCPA asked the member of the committee, which was an unusual procedure to be interrogating one of the members of the committee when you're making a presentation, but the chair gave him leave to do so. And he said, in your experience as an emergency room doctor, how many Kratom related cases have you seen? And this legislator, emergency room doctor in the real life, said, I've been working at this for over 30 years and I haven't seen any. And that sort of pops the bubble about this narrative that we hear so many people talk about. And I'm confident that as we move through in Kansas, that we've got an excellent chance to get the KCPA actually passed there. In the state of Michigan, we're moving ahead. We've got great support and we got leadership support. I'm hopeful that we're going to be able to get that through up in Michigan. And in Illinois, we have bills filed on both the House and the Senate. They're looking at now scheduling committee hearings. And so that's going along very well. Same in Minnesota. Representative Stone up there is our sponsor and working hard on it. And I think we're going to do very well in Minnesota as well. In Ohio, we continue to struggle with opponents, mainly in the addiction recovery space. And so we're addressing those. We're scheduling meetings with key members of the Senate there who are listening to the addiction recovery community in Ohio. So everybody knows, last year it passed the House 83-10, and it just got hung up in the Senate. So we're going to continue working there. In the state of Pennsylvania, we just had a great meeting today with the staff of the sponsor. And I think that we've ironed out some issues. They're going to do a bill. The bill itself will be a combination bill dealing with Delta 8 and Delta 9 and Kratom. And we don't like that commingling, but they, for reasons of legislative efficiency, are going to do that in Pennsylvania. It's not going to impact us negatively. It's just we don't like the association generally in that. Same's true in West Virginia. And this has been a tough haul because, as everybody knows, Senator Stewart in Pennsylvania or in West Virginia has been an ardent critic of Kratom. Now, we think he's misinformed, obviously. We think he's reacting to outdated science. I think he's capitalizing on what he thinks is a populist issue. And he is spewing out a lot of misinformation about not only Kratom, but some of the other products that he's concerned about, both Delta 8 and Delta 9. And by the way, Delta 8 and Delta 9 were just classified by the DEA this past week as controlled substances because they are the synthetic versions. They're not part of the natural plant, of the cannabinoid plant. So very interesting precedent-setting decisions in that area, which help us. But nonetheless, we've got a bill that's going to be coming out of the Senate that is actually okay for us. It's going to require some work over in the House, and we have commitments from House members that they will remove some of the more objectionable provisions of the West Virginia law. But we will have the framework of the KCPA embedded in that law. We can come back next year and improve it. But I think we're actually looking okay there. Doing great in New Jersey and New York. We're doing great in Florida. We're moving this legislation forward. We're a little slower track, but doing well in North Carolina and in Tennessee. In Connecticut and Montana, there are age limit bills, which we support, but we would like to see them expanded. So we're working with the sponsors there to see if they'll expand the consumer protections beyond just the age limit, but looking at the product limitations that we advocate for. One of the things that we have as a high priority at the AKA is that we want to take those states that have banned Kratom and we want to convert them into KCPA states. The state of Vermont received a petition from the American Kratom Association in January, and we asked them to remove the rule that they had imposed that scheduled Kratom back in, I think it started in 2012 and went through a couple of iterations, and the legislature got involved in 2014. So currently Kratom is banned. We received word yesterday that the department is going to commence rulemaking to remove the ban on Kratom because it doesn't meet the criteria for scheduling. That was fabulous news for us. There's a little bit of a regulatory rulemaking period that has to go forward, but they specifically said in their email to us, granting our petition, that in fact they're going to look to the legislature to conclude the deliberations on the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, and then they'll commence the rulemaking that's necessary to effectuate the removal of kratom from the banned list. That is terrific news. We expect a similar kind of action in Rhode Island because we all know that the interim director of the Department of Health in Rhode Island had already concluded publicly that kratom does not meet the scheduling criteria and that it would proceed with removing it through rulemaking, just like we expect to see in Vermont. So that was obviously great news. In Wisconsin, there is a meeting on the 10th of this month with the Controlled Substances Board. They've already had a preliminary, well, an extensive set of meetings, and they had a preliminary straw vote as to whether or not kratom meets the 8 factors that are required under Wisconsin law for scheduling and that mirror the federal statute on scheduling. And what they determined was at the straw poll vote that they held in January was that kratom did not meet 6 of the 8 criteria that are required for scheduling. And the 2 that it didn't were just administrative issues about the number of research articles and whether there's sufficient evidence to look at this issue with regards to safety concerns and addiction concerns. And those 2 factors obviously are met, but the 6 critical factors about whether it poses a public health threat, whether it's addiction liability, and what other medical things, the board voted overwhelmingly that 6 of those 8 did not meet the criteria. So we expect that they will formally conclude that discussion in their meeting on the 10th and recommend to the legislature that this be that kratom be removed from scheduling and that they proceed with rulemaking through the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. So that is obviously great news. In the state of Indiana, we had the Kratom Consumer Protection Act pass a House committee, went to the House floor, and it passed 53-40, despite strong opposition from the Indiana Medical Association. Now they're going to continue to expand their opposition as it goes to the Senate floor, but we have a real chance to actually remove that ban legislatively in the state of Indiana. And I think the decision by the Vermont Department of Health will help us, as well as these other states that are doing great in kind of moving towards a stronger regulatory preference rather than banning kratom as we go forward. In the state of Arkansas, we have a team of experts that are meeting with the governor's office staff and the interim secretary of the Department of Health next Tuesday. And we're going to make the same petition that was made to Vermont that they remove it administratively, because that's how the ban in Arkansas actually was enacted. It was on the word of one addiction recovery doctor to the Department of Health, and that led to the scheduling. And we think that was an inappropriate procedure, clearly was an inappropriate procedure, but something that we'll just have to deal with. So we're going to continue to work on in Arkansas, when this meeting is going to be critically important to us as we go forward. State of Virginia. This is the home state of the AKA's corporate offices, and the state of Virginia legislative, the General Assembly unanimously passed the Kratom Consumer Protection Act in both the House and the Senate. Now it's a slimmed down version that we're not real happy that it didn't go further, but we'll be back next year to strengthen it, just like we have to do in Colorado and we have to do in Georgia. We'll be back and making sure that we protect consumer access to kratom. But it's a great step forward in Virginia to get that strong of an affirmation of the need for regulations around kratom in the state of Virginia. And they will, when the governor signs it, be the 8th state to pass the KCPA. And so if we start to just count, I'm confident that we're going to get Texas, that'd be number 9. I'm confident that we're going to get the state of Missouri, that'd be number 10. I'm confident that we're going to get the state of West Virginia, that's number 11. I'm confident that we will get, let me make sure I get the list right. I'm confident we're going to get Kansas, so we'll get to 12. I think a good chance in Michigan, so we'll wait on that one. Illinois, I think we have an excellent chance, that would be 13. So we keep counting these, adding to our numbers, all of which collectively mean one thing, and that is that we are making progress in letting state legislators do what the FDA should be doing, and they're not doing, and that is to protect consumers from adulterated kratom products as we go forward. One last comment on the federal legislation. We have gotten the attention of the FDA because as we've had discussions with potential co-sponsors to increase the numbers so that we have a fully tripartisan or bipartisan list of co-sponsors for the refiling of the Protect Consumer Access to Kratom legislation at the federal level. The FDA is pushing back hard, but it's opened the opportunity for us to educate more members of Congress where the FDA is wrong, and we're actively engaged in this, and so we're going to continue to push hard, and we're gonna see if we can get we are going to get the bill refiled, and then we're going to start making sure that we get the hearings and the message gets out about Kratom and its value and the important stuff that we're doing. So I'll conclude with that. Let me just answer a couple of questions. I know they're up there. The trial attorneys testified in Georgia. They went so far to say it's illegal to grow Kratom in the United States, which is a blatant lie. That's not a question, that's a fact. That trial attorney demonstrated the lack of understanding and the lack of research into Kratom, and it was obvious. They made multiple errors, and I was able to call them out and in a series of meetings, and they took a beating on it because they were poorly prepared and they didn't have accurate information. The most glaring of which was that in their draft legislation, they first wanted to ban it completely. Then they said, okay, we'll ban only Kratom above certain levels of metrogeny and 7-hydroxymetrogeny. And so they pulled out of thin air a fictionalized number, which said it was so low that it doesn't even occur. If it ever occurs in any plant, it is Kratom plant. It is because it is an immature, early harvested plant that was critically important here. So, you know, they put a level so low that nobody would sell it and wouldn't have any effect if they did. And then they put another provision in it that said that if you enhance the metrogeny and you go above the levels that are set in the bill, that you're guilty of a felony. It would ban all Kratom in the state of Georgia, and it would make a criminal out of anyone that tried to sell Kratom that was part of a mature plant. And that's obviously the critical thing. So we're just in this situation. We just got to fight through it. And where we are now is excellent because we've gotten rid of that nonsense. And Justin, you just cited one of the lies that those trial attorneys told, because there are multiple ones. And I think that the evidence that we're able to expose those lies lies in the fact that we got the unanimous vote this morning out of the committee that puts a pretty good bill in place for us to protect along the way. Let's see. I don't know if the here's the question. This is the key question, right? Mac, you're extremely good at your job, and we're all super grateful. If for some reason you aren't available anymore, do you have anyone to fill your shoes, mentees or proteges? Ryan Burrows is on the call. He's the guy. He's the guy that went down to Livingston Parish and beat them into submission. So yes, we have a bench. We're developing that bench, and Ryan is not a bench player. He's now an advocate shoulder to shoulder with me. We got a lot of meetings that we're doing, and Ryan's filling those roles in a magnificent way. So I expect that at some point in the next 30 years, I'm probably going to retire. But Ryan will be able to step in when that gets done. So, but it's a great point. And you know, obviously, you look for succession in any organization, and this has actually been a concern of ours because you know, I know I look old, but I'm only 42. And so this is what this job does to you, right? So we want to make sure that we have a sustainable organization, and it's a great point. And we're going to continue to pursue the development of not only people, but also messaging that will allow for efficiently delivering the message to these legislators. And hopefully by the time I'm done in 30 years, we'll have the federal law in place, and we'll have all the states all in line, and that you won't need anybody. But right now, I think we're in good hands moving forward. So I think I don't know if there's any other questions there. I'll turn it back to you. Oh, there are questions. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Ryan. You can pick out what you think we ought to be doing here or answering any questions. I'm glad to do it.
Well, thank you, Mac. And I don't think we're doing anything in Delaware, but I could be wrong. Yeah. I'm sorry to our anonymous attendee there, but we'll focus on that next year for sure.
Let me just make a comment about this. There was in the state of Oklahoma, the only reason that the KCPA passed is that one vendor got energized and reached out to legislators. Representative Pay was one of them, and pitched them on doing this, and then bird dogged it. We didn't have at the time the resources and the bandwidth to get into the state of Oklahoma. I'm telling you, it happened because of that, and it can happen in the same way here. So I think that's important. I just saw the question pop up about South Carolina. What are we doing there? We have a ban bill. I've spoken at length with the sponsor. He is weakened in his resolve on this. He was influenced, obviously, by the Kratom Danger Awareness folks. Now that he sees that there's an alternative, we're working with him. And so hopefully we're going to be able to convert him into a KCPA situation. But I also think that we'll stop the ban. I mean, that's just a matter of procedure here. So that's where we are.
That's great. And just an update on Alabama.
There is no update on Alabama. Here's our problem. In Alabama, the District Attorneys Association is—
I thought I was on mute.
no, the District Attorney Association is adamant against us. And in talking to legislators and our potential lobbyists in the future, they advised that we wait until the resolution of the medical marijuana law. It's a very conservative state, and they thought that we would get into trouble and if we were to come down there, and we might end up with a long-term resolute body of legislators that say no to it. But I think next year we're going to be— well, we'll obviously be active next year if all these other states that have banned it come in, and then that puts real pressure on them, right? So I think it's a next year project.
That's great. And from John, who's the addiction doc in Arkansas that objects to Kratom?
So John, I don't remember his name offhand, but I have it. I have the record, so I'll share that with you. And John, by the way, John Schintzholzer is going to be one of the leading addiction experts in the state of Virginia. Helped us with the Virginia KCPA. Fabulous guy, fabulous reservoir of knowledge, and a great advocate for people having choices in harm reduction in the addiction recovery space, and can challenge the theory that you take an addiction recovery program that replaces a highly addictive drug with another addictive drug, which is what the current plan is. And sometimes that's appropriate, but there are many times when it's not, and where Kratom can be the answer. So we're glad that John is working with us here and helping us with this advocacy effort. And welcome to you, John. I want everyone to get to meet John at some point. In fact, in the next webinar, we should have him as a panelist, so that, in fact, you could elevate him to a panelist now, I guess, if you wanted to, but I think that'd be great. But people ought to meet John Schintzholzer, because and that would be unfair to him because we haven't prepped him for this, but he's a great advocate and we appreciate his support.
Yeah, John, I'll just second that. I thank you for all of your help in Virginia and Atlanta. And yeah, not to put you on the spot, but on the next call, the advocacy community would greatly benefit from hearing your story, and we'll definitely schedule you to be on. Let's see, any updates on Washington State?
So Washington State had what's called a short session this year. And I was sitting at a meeting of the Council of State Governments in Savannah, Georgia. And the AK joins these organizations to develop relationships with legislators. And at that table, I was talking to the majority leader of the Virginia House of Representatives, and we were talking about Kratom. And there was a fellow that was sitting there who interjected into the conversation. It turns out he's the chairman of one of the drug policy committees in the Washington legislature. And he engaged in the discussion. He is a big harm reduction advocate. And he said, look, your advice was correct from your lobbyist that short session, we're not going to get done. He said, but I want to help. He said, and what I propose is that over the interim, that we have a informational hearing, and then we be prepared for the Kratom Consumer Protection Act, where we have a full session next year in the state of Washington. Great question. Glad to— I mean, that's a terrific opportunity for us in the upcoming legislature. And that all happened in Washington. And that all happened because I was speaking loudly, and he overheard us and joined in that conversation. And I don't always speak loudly, by the way. I'm a pretty introverted guy, And so it's just by luck that he happened to overhear this conversation, but that opened a door for us. And I'm looking forward to cooperating with him in the informational session this summer when we can get it scheduled. And that will involve consumers and advocates in the state of Washington as well.
Great. Thank you. And in what ways does the federal KCPA affect the states? Also, once the KCPA is passed in states, how long do vendors have to become fully compliant?
So the answer to the first question is there's an issue about state preemption, and it's in every single issue that comes up in the Congress, and you lose votes in a hurry if you mandate the states that they can't do something. So it's a 10th Amendment issue about states' rights. So we always have to be careful about this. But the way that the federal KCPA impacts the states is that it will require the Food and Drug Administration to regulate kratom as a food. It will not permit them to regulate it as a new dietary ingredient, requiring a notification that has to be reviewed by and accepted by the FDA. They won't be allowed to do that. They won't be allowed to use the provisions of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act in order to block kratom from getting on the marketplace. They also will be required to put up a section on their website, the comments by scientists and reports on current science that is really being driven by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And that will become the repository for information for state legislators to go and look at and say, so they won't be, the FDA won't be allowed to just say, oh, it's an unapproved drug and it's dangerous, because then there will be on the FDA website with this legislation, if it passes, when it passes, that they'll be required to put all the state up there, and there will at least be a more balanced look at it. And then the FDA will not be allowed to impose a complete ban on all kratom raw materials. They can only put an import ban on vendors that are selling contaminated or importing in the United States contaminated raw materials. They won't be allowed to ban it the way they do now on the import alerts. So that'll be great news too. So there's a lot of great things that will happen here. So we're excited about this, and I think the federal legislation will really make a real difference in the state's view of this. The KCPAs will still work in those states, and that'll be a great thing. But it will be the overall arching regulatory program that the FDA will be forced to implement.
Great. Thank you, Mac. And from Denise, what about Ascension Parish in Louisiana? It was banned there a few months ago. That is correct, as well as unfortunately Rapides Parish. What we're doing there is successfully in Livingston, we're able to have them understand that this is a much larger issue, that they should wait for the direction of the state, which will commence in April, middle of April. And in the interim, working with the sheriff in Ascension to reverse the ban temporarily until that decision is made from a state level again. We do work every day in that state, along with all of the others, to track the local agendas in the parishes. And I go and speak where needed when we see a ban come up. Let's see. I don't know, Mac. Do you know the name of the kratom derivative that has a patent, I heard, allegedly associated with Scott Gottlieb?
So that there's a little bit of disinformation here. There was a patent that was put on the alkaloids in kratom back in the early 90s by Smith Beckham, which is through a series of acquisitions now landed in some part. It was abandoned, by the way. So there's really no connection to Gottlieb at all. There is a clear connection between Pfizer, where Dr. Gottlieb sits on their board, and an application that was made by Pfizer to the FDA for a new drug application for a non-addictive pain relief medication, which obviously implicates kratom, because if you can buy on the open market a kratom product that helps you to manage your pain, that's non-addictive in the classic addiction sense. I mean, you've got benign addictions like caffeine addictions, which are accepted by scientists as being not dangerous, and that's where kratom falls, as opposed to the obviously acute addictions that come with opioids. So if Pfizer is trying to get approved a non-addictive pain management therapy drug, it would be in their interest to try to demonize kratom. And that's why I think Scott Gottlieb should shut his mouth. He clearly has a conflict and he really ought to stand down, but there's probably a better reason why Scott Gottlieb should stand down on this issue. He stood before the American people and he said that kratom is an opioid. It is not. It is not by chemistry. It's not by law. It's not by plant origin. He is wrong. He should not be allowed to say lies. And that's what he did when he was the FDA commissioner. He also got up in front of the American people and said, we've got this wonderful new computer analytical program called the PHASE program, and we can predict the binding affinity of kratom's alkaloids using this PHASE computer algorithm. By the way, the algorithm is the old story, garbage in, garbage out. They designed the algorithms that would analyze that, they being the FDA, and then he wants to stand up their credibility. He says, we have now, through our PHASE algorithms, determined the binding affinity of metrogenine to the mu-opioid receptors. Whoop-de-doo. First off, if I were to do a new drug application and I walked into the FDA and said, I would like you to accept as safety data my PHASE modeling system, which uses a computer algorithm to determine the binding affinity of the product that I'm submitting for you to approve, they would laugh me out of the room. They tell me, no, you can't do that. And yet he stood before the American people and said, oh, well, you should trust us, trust the FDA, because we've developed this whiz-bang computer algorithm. It was dissembled by experts across the board. He should not be talking about this. He's proven that his bias about kratom will drive him to say things that are not just wrong, they're goofy. That's much I can say about that. I wish he would just stick to the science and stay away from this discussion about kratom.
Great. Thank you, Mac. And Adam has a question. Is there any literature anywhere on how to decide whether a vendor should sell kratom as a food or a supplement? We are introducing our GMP 3.0 program in partnership with Bob Durkin, former Director of Dietary Supplements with the FDA. And we'll have those standards released on our website. Our goal is within a week. We would allow the vendor to go either route, whether it be food or a dietary supplement, but that would then depend on claims you're making as well as labeling, and that's detailed in the program. So again, once we get those details laid out, we'll have a formal announcement as well, so everyone will be aware, and that'll be posted on our website to replace the current 2.0 program. We touched on Florida. With Illinois having KCPA discussions being scheduled, is now an ideal time to be making calls, et cetera, or is it better to wait?
So I would ask everyone to wait till you get an alert from the AKA. These are, I know it sounds crazy in terms of how we make laws, but we will get a notice of a hearing 2 days before it's actually going to be held. So, I've just got to have my bag packed and be ready to go, and the same for Ryan. This is just the life we have to live with this. And we're going to reach, as soon as it gets scheduled, then we'll let you know with an alert that we need you to contact these legislators. And let me give you an illustration. A member of the Georgia committee that passed out the bill today stopped me in the hallway and said, I've got over 500 emails about kratom saying not to ban it. And I said, I'm glad to hear that. She wasn't glad, by the way, but the fact that she mentioned it and the fact that you have reached out to her made a difference. So as clunky as the system is, clunky in the sense that we don't have much advance notice, they're not going to pay attention to your message until they pick up the agenda, because they're dealing with hundreds and hundreds of bills. And they get an agenda for the committee hearing they're about to go into 2 days hence. Then they'll pay attention to what's being said. So that's what we've got to do, and it works. We just need you to stand ready and be ready to go. Have your emails packed and ready to go, like Ryan and I have to have our bags packed. So let's encourage you to do that and reach out. Don't wait. Once you get the alert, do what's asked and get your message out there.
A couple of questions here, Mac. Can you give a legal definition of an opioid, what the criteria for the classification is?
I could, but I go to Jack Henningfield's
Right.
8-factor analysis, and he explains the all of the intricacies of how an opioid is evaluated. And just go Google it, and you'll see it. The Jack Henningfield's 8-factor analysis.
We'll take a few more questions here. What's going on in New Jersey? I'm a nurse and I care for my sister who has trigeminal neuralgia, and kratom is the only thing that helps with this facial pain. The drugs don't work. I wish that I could use it in the hospital.
So tell that story when you're called upon. We're doing great in New Jersey. We just picked up a Senate sponsor. Our House sponsor is great Carol Murphy, who's the House, I think she's the House Majority Leader. Great sponsor. We've been working with the committee chairman. We've been educating them, and the good news here is that our antagonist was Representative Ron Dancer, who just believed that kratom was dangerous, and he would put in the kratom ban bill every year, and we had to fight that for 4 years. Now, unfortunately, Representative Dancer passed away, and his replacement came in, and we've had a great discussion. Our lobbies had a great discussion with him, and he's very open to this discussion. So what was driving Representative Dancer was just the disinformation that the FDA was circulating, and then some reports that he was concerned about with potential adverse events of kratom. But we're looking great in New Jersey, but we'll need the help when we get to the committee hearings to have that kind of story told.
Excellent. And then from Melody, and thank you, Melody, for all that you do. But as far as any info on East Feliciana Parish in Louisiana, I just looked earlier this afternoon. I have not seen anything post on their agenda, but as Max said, the bag is packed and we'll be headed there if there's a ban discussed. I believe otherwise the majority of these have been answered. Are there any other closing comments at this point? And we'll leave the Q&A open for a few more moments.
Yeah, I just saw the one that asked me to clarify, and it's correct that the DEA was addressing the synthetic Delta 9, Delta 8, not the naturally occurring, because that was the deal. It's not part of the natural plant. There are Delta 8 and Delta 9 hemp-derived legal products. Makes it complicated, obviously, but with kratom, we oppose synthetic alkaloid and metabolite enhancements, and that's what's happening here with Delta 8 and Delta 9 for the synthetics. But if under the Farm Bill of 2018, for a hemp-derived product that has THC content, anything below 0.3% is legal, and that should be consistent across the board. In the state of Pennsylvania, the sponsor of the bill wants to include this very issue of Delta 8 and Delta 9 in the bill to clarify this particular point, so that those products are subject, and they've adopted the KCPA model for Delta 9, Delta 8, which is, obviously flattering to us, although I don't like the connection because it confuses issues, but the chairman's hell bent to do this. And so we're going to honor that and move forward there in Pennsylvania with a combined bill. So closing comments.
Perfect.
What you see on this call is I think the kind of success story that works perfectly. We have a group of advocates who are energized, passionate, informed, and are willing to fight. And you have a group of people that are your voices that are equally passionate. I hope you see that. I hope that you take the chance to look at and watch some of these videos where we're given the opportunity to testify. Sometimes it's infuriating. I think in the Georgia hearing, I tried to express that frustration because the committee was listening to nonsense and giving them all the time that they wanted and giving us very little time. So we had to compress it and we had to get passionate about it. But we're prepared, ready, and willing to do that. When Ryan goes down to the parishes in Louisiana, you see an equally passionate appeal that's being made. Now, we back it up with a lot of science. We get the advocates to send messages. It's working. There are times when we don't make it across the finish line, but most of the time it works. So my message would be, thank you, and let's not sit on our laurels. let's not let the successes give us the sense of, well, we don't need to worry about it because it always seems to work out. It only works out because we stay passionate about it and we do all the things we should do in order to communicate our message. I'll tell you this, the enemies are out there and they're doing everything they can every day to try to undermine this message. They will say whatever they need to say in order to get a legislator to believe that we're wrong. And they will call, well, you saw the trial attorneys go after me personally. They went after AKA. They said goofy things. They said AK funds all the research. All the stuff that you see is from the Chris McCurdy is funded by AKA. That's complete nonsense. Not true. And yet they said it. There's been one study that the AK has funded. That's the animal study, the rat study about the safety of kratom. And we had nothing to do with the design of the study. We weren't allowed to see the study while it was ongoing. We weren't allowed to see the results until after it had been submitted to the FDA and ready for publication. And they want to accuse us. And by the way, they said, oh, well, the AK's got this big lobbying group and they're all well paid. And then they don't acknowledge these are the trial attorneys. Why are they there? How are they getting paid? Were they there out of the altruistic reasons, the goodness of their hearts? No, they're there to try to win settlements for their clients from deep pocket kratom processors. And they didn't want to acknowledge that. Now they finally got around to it last night where one of the representatives asked the trial attorney, are you going to use what you're asking us to do here in court? And he said, oh, no, we would never do that. Well, there's a word for that. And it's not polite company. You can say it. It's not true. I'll tell you that. They clearly have this problem. So that's where we are. And we're going to continue to fight, but we do it shoulder to shoulder with you. So thanks to everyone.
That's great. Well,